Hey, folks, we're back with episode. What is this, Nick? Is this 34?
I think so. I don't know. I haven't looked at our episode numbers. It's a lot.
Holy shit. Yeah, it is. It's 34. So, yeah, we're back with episode 34 of Skirmish Supremacy. And as usual, I am joined by my co-host, Nick. And yes, this week I'll be talking again compared to this last week where things went haywire. But we are joined by none other than Patrick Keith, the Sculpt Dude himself, the sculptor extraordinaire. Patrick, how much more can I blow up your ego before we get going on this thing?
Oh, dude, it doesn't really take a lot. I mean, it's hard enough for me to get through the doorway, with my head as it is. So.
Okay. The man that is great at sculpting boobies.
And all of that other stuff that goes along with them. So, yeah. But hey, I appreciate you guys having me on the show again. I know it hasn't been very long, since I was on before, and this is like our second Kickstarter, I guess, since the last time I was on. So,
yeah, it is. Gee, man, like I'm just thinking about it now. I'm thinking it tricked on like a month ago. I'm like, no, it's been longer than that.
Yeah. No, it was earlier. It was earlier in the year. Was it? Oh gosh, was it before Adepticon?
Yes. I believe it was. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was.
Well, okay. Yeah, well then it's gone by, just like that. That's crazy. Yeah.
It has.
Yeah, I call shenanigans.
I mean, hell, the fact that we're on episode 34 is pretty crazy in my mind.
Definitely.
Yeah, definitely. So anyway, Patrick, we know you're doing awesome, especially after seeing the news of probably one of the biggest things we're going to talk about tonight for a little bit anyway, is your Babes 3 Kickstarter.
Yeah, Babes 3. We kind of missed a year because the first Babes project we ran was in 2012, and so we were to fulfill that one that we were expecting, and so kind of did Babes 2 last year, and then we're doing Babes 3 this year, and this time around I was able to get a hold of Chris Walton, and he had some fantastic designs and stuff out there in his little Facebook folder for D&D women that he was working on. These were just hobby designs. It was just like, hey, this is kind of cool. I'm coming up with these different ideas, and he would post them, and I would see them come up into my feed. And so I contacted him, and I said, hey, are you gonna do anything with these? I mean, is it for something, or is it something else that you're working on? He was like, no, I'm just doing them for fun. So so I kind of pitched it to him, and I said, well, I'm looking for art, to do another Babes Kickstarter thing, and if we can work out a deal, I'd like to license some of the designs and stuff and sculpt those. And he was, he thought that was awesome. He's like, well, cool. I'd like to have these, turned into miniatures or whatever. So, so we worked it out, and, we picked out some of them, and, I've started sculpting on those. I didn't quite get them all done before we launched the project, but I had some other pieces and stuff that I was wanting to do for it anyway. So, throughout the course of the project, I'll be posting work in progress pictures of some of the sculpts that I'm working on, based on his art and everything. So
nice. Yeah, and I see a lot of the work in progress pics up there now.
Mm-hmm.
And I know a lot of people look at this and go, oh, well, he's sculpting it 3 times the size of what it's going to be. And I'm looking at this going, no, that's the top of a cork, you bunch of assholes.
yeah, those are all 1-inch corks that I work on. That's the actual size of the sculpt. So
crazy man.
Yeah, well, I cheat a little bit. So, I use an optivisor for magnification. And it was funny when I first started sculpting and I was turning out pieces. I was like, wow, I really kind of want to progress in my work. And, I'm looking for the next milestone and all that kind of thing. And so then I saw that painters were using, optivisors to paint their minis, for like competition and stuff. So I thought, well, maybe I should get that, and try it, for sculpting or whatever. So when I got it and started, really focusing in on tightening up the details and the edges of things and all that sort of thing, it was amazing how much my work leveled up when I could actually see what I was working on at the time. So, yeah, so that's magnification is very important, to do what we do.
Yeah, well, especially at that small of a detail, and you don't use 3D. Well, you might for some art, but like you don't use 3D sculpting per se. Like you're not doing any of that. You're doing it all by hand with wire and the putty and very old school, which, you know, I really appreciate.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I have done some ZBrush stuff. Most of the things that I turn out, you know, digitally are, you know, mechanical things. I've done like a lot of, you know, robot stuff and vehicles and that type of thing. And it's really great for that because, you know, you get the symmetry and it gives you, you know, uniform lines and all that, which are very difficult to do on a lot of weapons and that kind of stuff. So in order to save myself from some time, if I have to replicate a lot of stuff, I will, you know, go to ZBrush and have a part printed out or whatever, and then, you know, master it in, resin casting and that kind of thing. But, you know, but the sculpts that you're seeing on here, these are all, like you're saying, they're traditional practical sculpts, you know, and, you know, I started out using green stuff, you know, pretty much just like everybody else does. And, you know, I ran into some issues and stuff with it. And I've gone through this transition over the last 10 years of like these different sculpting materials that I've tried that, and now I've kind of settled on beast putty, which is giving me the results, you know, that I'm looking for. So now I'm really trying to start to level up, you know, using that.
Gotcha. Yeah, I've never used that before. So for me, well, I mean, I suck at sculpting for the most part anyway, but like I'm okay with green stuff. I've never used any of the other mediums though. So I can imagine I'd be just equally as terrible as I am with green stuff. But anyway, I digress. You have 286 backers. Your goal was 9,000.
Mm-hmm.
You blew this freaking thing out of the water. You're already at 13,886. You still have 9 days to go, and you did not run a long Kickstarter. No,
we tend to watch the mid-project slump, you know, and backers will tend to bail on that, you know, when it gets like, you know, through a long stretch. We've got some really cool stuff that, you know, we're going to kind of drop in midway through the project. Like, you know, I'm going to be posting additional stretch goals and additional art, you know, and I'm working on other sculpts right now that haven't been shown yet, that I've kind of got reserved behind the scenes. So we'll be posting those along the course of the project. So, I mean, if as a backer, you know, you're kind of looking at the project going like, well, it kind of did its thing and I'm either in or out and, you know, I'm not going to check it. It's like, well, you may want to kind of hit the project, you know, a couple of times, you know, before it wraps up, because there's going to be some cool things to look at, you know, that you may not expect in order to kind of keep interest and so forth on it. So.
Nice.
But, you know, like you said, it did fund really fast. And Vicky and I were kind of watching it right after we launched, and it just kind of kept going and kept going. And, you know, after the first 45 minutes, it was like, ooh, wow, that's pretty quick. And it funded a whole lot faster for us, you know, when we went back and looked at the metrics on it from Babes 2. And I kind of attribute that to two things that we did. We didn't get out and do a lot of advertising for it and, you know, kind of, you know, spend a lot of money on banners and all that type of stuff like we've done before, because we just don't have the budget for it. But what I did this time was the Kickstarter projects have kind of a new function now where when you create a project, you can go in and set it to preview. Okay, so what it does is it gives you a little link at the top of your build page that you can share and get people to come and give you feedback and stuff on, you know, how you're putting your campaign together. And of course, I mean, we're running this campaign exactly the same way as we've run, you know, all of the other ones. This is our 8th Kickstarter campaign, and so we've kind of got, you know, a lot of experience as far as like, you know, how we want to structure it and, you know, how it's going to go through pledge management and all that sort of thing. So it's kind of baked in. So I didn't really have a lot of stuff, you know, in the way of like, you know, we're going to make changes on it, but at least people could come by and look at the project and see like what we were going to be offering. So it's like, well, okay, so here's some of the concept art, here's some of the sculpts, you know, work in progress, and here's some of the things that, you know, we're thinking about offering. And it allowed them to, where the pledge button normally is, you can click on that and it will notify you, hey, this project is launched. So we set that project up, you know, about a month or two ago and put that link out there, and that allowed, you know, our potential backers to come and check it out early and be notified right away that, you know, the project is launched and, hey, we're ready for you to come and you know, back it. It's live now. So that was a really cool feature that we hadn't utilized before, and I think that kind of contributed a lot to it funding as early as it did.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's like anything else. You guys have been doing, quite a few Kickstarters. I don't want to say you're a Kickstarter veteran. You're definitely pumping out using Kickstarter, to be frank, are not supposed to be used. But like you've been around enough to kind of know what it's going to take for you to do a successful Kickstarter, which is always a good thing. At this point, you've learned from your experience.
Oh yeah. It's definitely it's a good marketing tool. I mean, as far as I know there's a lot of debate and stuff out there. It's like, well, should it be used for pre-order? And there's a lot of companies that do that. And some people will back stuff, and some people won't because of ethical reasons and that kind of thing. And I completely understand that. We're still a garage company. I mean, we're still. Right. I mean, I'm not Reaper Miniatures or some of these other larger kind of like you would expect. And so it's still a hobby business for us in that regard. What I mean by that is that I'm not, taking my sole, salary from, Bombshell Miniatures. It's like I still rely quite heavily on client work, and sculpting for other companies and that kind of thing in order to, kind of pay the bills and all that. So we're still building an audience for Bombshell Miniatures, and we're still, pushing that boulder up the hill, until we can find out, where the summit is, and it'll take on kind of a life of its own. And each time that we do one of these Kickstarter projects, it allows us to, fund, doing another set of miniatures and covering the mold costs, covering, the time that it takes me in order to sculpt the figures and pay for the concept art and,
right.
painting and all that type of stuff that we just don't have out of pocket because, I mean, I would literally have to sculpt a figure for a company and then sculpt a free one for another company in order to pay for, doing one for ourselves if that were the case. So.
Right. And that's just, it's not feasible. It's already bad enough that a lot of artists don't get paid really what their worth as it is in the industry. I know there's a lot of talk about that where people are going around looking for freelance artists that are doing stuff basically for pro bono or just to say, hey, I worked on it's not cool.
Right.
I got that exposure for you.
yeah it's like that exposure won't fill my soup bowl. Yeah.
Yes, it will, because enough people will see you and they'll want your work. Come on.
Yeah, and you keep turning that work out. It'll eventually get you something, I guess. But that's a long road.
Yeah, definitely. That's we get jumped on that rabbit hole later on, but let's
Sure.
Right now, I just want to focus right now on the Kickstarter. Really, let's dive in, take a look at a lot of these miniatures. I want to see everything that you've got going on. Now, the one thing I did notice about this Kickstarter is a lot of these are based upon people that are in the industry that a lot of us know.
Really? Okay. I can pick out one that we've named after a particular industry person. What are the other ones that you've noticed?
Let's see here. We have Officer Haley, which I'm guessing is probably Jen Haley.
Actually, what's funny about that is that's named after a television actress.
Really?
Yep.
Well, here I was thinking you were giving something off to Jen Haley.
Even though Jen Haley is awesome in every way,
yes.
And I would love to do a tribute figure for her. It's not that particular one.
There's this one that stands out quite a bit that I'm probably going to give her some ribbing on later on. Elizabeth Beckford.
Yep, that's the one that I intentionally named after Elizabeth. When I had posted the art and was talking to the painters that are offering reward levels and stuff for us, she picked out some of the pieces that she wanted to paint as our studio models, and that was one of the particular pieces. So as I was going through and creating the graphics and everything, I had her name, stamped kind of on the art at the bottom of it, so I would know which painter was going to get what, sculpt later on, to paint. And so I thought, well, I'll just call her Elizabeth, So I came up with the name kind of on the spot, and then posted the graphics and stuff for it. So she was she was really kind of surprised by that, and messaged me. It was like, "Oh my God, that's awesome!" So that was a lot of fun.
Nice. Yeah. So I noticed too on this one, you have some. So out of the sculpts that are currently available, you have some stuff that's like a little bit more modern. You have one that kind of has a bit of that retro sci-fi feel, like from Counterblast. Obviously, you got Elizabeth Beckford. She's very much looks like your classical pseudo-Renaissance D&D character. And then you've got some that very much look like they belong in the War Machine universe.
Yeah.
So you're kind of borrowing from just about every company that you've worked for in the past as far as things that you've done.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and that's kind of funny because it's like, Chris Walton's done a lot of designs for Privateer Press, and he kind of, has that pervasive style where it's like, there's as an artist, you kind of build a toolbox over your, I guess, career, where it's like, well, when I go to design something or I go to sculpt a certain thing, I kind of have this approach to it where, I do it over and over and over, and I kind of lean on that whenever I come up with something else, So when you look at a lot of Chris Walton's designs, you can kind of see some of the, I guess, design elements that, you would recognize in a Privateer Press piece or, whatever. But they're wholly, original and unique characters and so forth. And what really kind of drew me to the fantasy pieces that he was doing was how much character they had. Like one of the fighter characters, she has like a peg leg and this big, flat-topped helmet with like a little pigeon, a carrier pigeon on the top of it or whatever. And I mean, there was just all these really clever little details to it that that I was really, kind of drawn to. And I was like, that would be really great, to sculpt all of that stuff. The Sister Marion piece that we've got out there, the art that I've started on, I mean, she's got like a ham tied to her belt and, and then some kind of big, iconic, holy symbol or whatever hanging off of her belt and all that sort of thing. So there's a lot of that type of stuff that really makes those interesting characters to me, and that was one of the reasons why I wanted to sculpt them.
Now, are you going to try to do the smoke floating off of her sensor flail as well, or are you going to skip that?
Yeah, no. Well, there's a lot of things that I really hate sculpting, and weapons is one of them. The other thing is spell effects, and I consider smoke coming out of the sensor to be a spell effect, and it's the way that it trails off. It's not going to work production wise. I mean, it would just be this big chunk of metal, and it'd be cumbersome and keep, probably coming off of it, because it'd be a separate part and all that. So yeah, she'll have the flail, as a sensor type thing, but yeah, I don't think I'm going to do the smoke on that.
Okay. So. Now, the one that I really like, the one that really stuck out to me, and it's mainly because of the Bobcat, is Ranger Brenna and Jody. That one looks awesome.
Yeah, that's really cool. And the thing that kind of drew me to it was her costuming design, which has kind of got that, Russian kind of a feel to it, like you would expect, with the design of her hat and everything, the fur hat that she has. And the fact that she had like a little animal companion, and it's a dwarf character. And typically, you don't normally see a dwarf as a ranger character with a pet like that. And to me, it had a very World of Warcraft kind of feel in a way. So I thought that would make, a really nice little set, since, of course, the main character is, kind of smaller because she's a dwarf. Then, in order to kind of take up that volume, having an animal companion with her, really kind of filled that out. So, but plus, we've done a lot of sidekick characters before for some of our other babes, where we kind of paired them up, where it's like, well, we have a babe that's kind of like this, so maybe we should do like a little critter or, some other kind of, like a robot or something that would go with them. And it was kind of baked into it, as part of the design. So, onto that.
Yeah, I mean, that was probably the one that stood out to me the most. Besides, I'm probably gonna butcher this, but the Sheldorith.
Yeah.
She looks like the Elven Blade Dancer.
She is really cool because of all of the forest druid kind of aspects to her. I mean, even the weapons that she has kind of reminds me a little bit of, like a druid sickle in a way. So, and I mean, when I first got into, wargaming and all this back in the day, and I'm talking like first edition Warhammer Fantasy Battle, my army of choice was always the Wood Elves, and they had a certain kind of Celtic aesthetic to them anyway, which was kind of nice. But this really kind of pushes that design even further with like, a wood textured grain, on like, some of her armor and, and that kind of stuff. So I think what's going to be tricky is the pose on it, because she's got kind of this weightless kind of magical, floating kind of an aesthetic. So I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to engineer that to give that kind of effect, but still have it be a practical miniature, that would stand up and be balanced.
That is going to be really, really hard to pull off without just like sticking a clear plastic peg up her butt.
You're right, and I want to avoid that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean the other way.
Too.
Yeah, I'm sure she does. The other thing I've seen a lot of other companies do is they like stick the weapons kind of into the ground to give it the look like they're floating, but then it looks like they've got like some weird gorilla strength, or the fact that they're on such a thin peg.
Yeah,
it's just going to be bad.
I think what's going to wind up happening is she's probably going to have a scenic kind of a base to her, where there will be like these vines and other undergrowth kind of coming up to support her, from where her toes and stuff are. And I've done a couple of pieces like that for Dark Sword, because a lot of the Stephanie Law art that I had adapted, and sculpted for Dark Sword has a very, light, ethereal kind of feel to some of those designs. And so engineering it in order, into, something that's going to, inevitably be a little chunk of metal is really tricky to do and still have it come out looking like, as ethereal as the art is. Because there's so many practical things to take into account, like, once it's been mastered and, once you go into production and everything, there's a little bit of shrinkage each mold iteration that you make. And so you have to really kind of, thicken up some areas so that, they'll hold up to that production process and still be a viable miniature, for the end consumer. So I do have a little bit of experience, kind of doing that. So I'm going to try to lean on some of that and try to capture as much of the design as I can, but still make it work as a practical miniature.
Right. So I see that the next one you've got ready to unlock here, which more than likely it's going to happen at the pace that you're going, is Anugra the Deep Seer. So she very much, well, it says Mistress of the Cosmos, and she very much reminds me of something that I would have seen out of the Planescapes campaign setting for D&D going back in the day.
Oh yeah, it's really got that kind of vibe.
They did not bring that back.
Yeah, it's really got that kind of vibe to it. And when I looked at that design, that kind of look sort of captured me too, because like on her staff, I guess there's like all of these little spheres or circles or whatever that kind of made me think of a constellation or solar system, of some kind. And so I kind of leaned on a little bit of the Dark Crystal for her name, because Agra was a really interesting character in that, where, the first time that you meet her in the movie, you kind of go in and there's this giant, astrolabe kind of apparatus that's, tracking all of the planets and everything. And that's a really interesting sort of, device. And so I kind of saw a lot of that in the design of this, and it kind of, it sort of made me think of that, as far as, what she might be.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. So, and I know that your stuff is your typical 28 millimeter heroic size, which is how do they call that? Like true 32?
Yeah, I'm not really even sure what that means. Because there's that term is kind of thrown around, in the business quite a bit and online, and basically, I think people just want their miniatures to kind of match the other miniatures that they have. you know.
Right.
And so I've got a little reference image, you know, pretty close to the top of the project page, where it shows these are sculpts that I've done for, you know, these 4 companies, basically Reaper, Dark Sword, Privateer Press, and Bombshell. Okay. And most of the time, whenever I sculpt something, if it's for an existing line, that company will send me, if I don't already have them in my collection, I mean, they'll send me reference miniatures and say, okay, well, we want them to fit these other miniatures. You know, it's like, well, this character is going to be, you know, 34 millimeters tall, you know, if it's like a big, you know, bulky type of thing or whatever, you know, or it's going to be 27 millimeters tall, you know, but we want the proportions to fit, you know, this and that. And even though the Dark Sword miniatures kind of range in between, you know, 30 and 34 and 36 millimeters, you know, somewhere there, depending on if they're female or male or whatever. Really what you're looking at is the proportions of that, because the size of the head versus the rest of the model is what's going to make it seem taller is. So say, for example, if you sculpted a 28 millimeter model, but the head on it is only 3 millimeters tall, that miniature is actually going to look taller than it really is. And it's a very, very strange kind of optical illusion in that. Whereas if you look at miniatures that, you know, from a company like Bolt Action, those are very traditional 28 millimeter, you know, proportioned models, you know, where you kind of count as like, well, they're 5 heads high. And so, you know, and that makes their hands larger, you know, some of these other, you know, more cartoony aspects. And it just really depends on, you know, what people prefer to have, you know, in their collection. And so, yeah, the babes that I'm sculpting for Bombshell, maybe not, they wouldn't really fit as well with something that's more of like, you know, styled as a Bolt Action type miniature, but it would fit in with like a lot of other, you know, common gaming miniatures. So I try to be very conscientious of that.
Well, yeah, that's definitely a good thing to do, because, I mean, ultimately you're not making, I mean, outside of Counterblast, that's a totally different subject, but you're not making your miniatures for like any one particular game unless that company's commissioning you to do that. So you want it to kind of fit in with the wide range of everything. So if people are using it as a proxy, or people are using it as a D&D figure, or some homebrew game where your stuff can fit right in and it's not going to look out of place.
Right. So it has the widest use possible.
Right, exactly. Which is definitely a good thing nowadays, because, you know, with the way that there's so many companies out there producing miniatures, you know, having yours thrown out there in some way is always a good thing.
Well, yeah, and I mean, and I stay pretty current as far as like what's going on. I mean, there's very little new that pops up that, you know, I don't find out about. You know, so I try to keep my pulse on the, you know, the industry and to see what's going on and what new things are coming out and what trends are out there and that kind of thing. I'm very interested in that as a hobby, you know, because it's like, well, I enjoy all aspects of that. But then it's also important for me to kind of follow along with, you know, trends and things, because that's the business that I'm in. So, you know, when I talk to a lot of people, you know, I'll usually, you know, I'll be in a conversation like, well, hey, have you seen this thing that's coming out? Have you seen that thing that's coming out? Such and such just posted a blah over here. And it's like, you know, some of the people that I talk to is like, I don't know what you're talking about. I've never seen any of that stuff. And it's like, well, you know, I try to stay current, you know, on what's going on. So, and plus I kind of support some of that stuff too. So, you know, I'll go out and, you know, back a Kickstarter or, you know, pimp somebody's stuff out. And I'm a big fan of, you know, certain sculptors and certain other companies, you know, and I'll buy their stuff and I don't have time to paint anymore, but I mean, I put it in my pile of stuff that I would paint that if I had the time to, you know, so.
Yeah. That pile.
Don't we all?
That pile, yeah.
Nick's keeps growing faster than he knows what to do with it.
We don't talk about that.
And it's very easy, for that to get out of control because there's just so much coming out all the time. And it's really cool, every time I turn around, there's some kind of new sci-fi game or whatever, and it's like, wow, I really, I would get that, if I had the means to get it. It looks pretty amazing.
Yeah, there's a lot of times I just kind of have to plug my ears, close my eyes, and just go la 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 la. Just walk away.
Which doesn't help when you host a podcast that we have a lot of people that are on Kickstarter coming through.
Yeah.
It's really painful.
Yeah.
Really painful.
Yeah, well, we kind of do it to ourselves. After a while, we just got to stop, kicking ourselves in the face every day. But
eventually, you just kind of go numb.
Yeah.
I don't know when that is, but I keep holding out hope.
Yeah.
And so doesn't my wife in our checkbook.
Uh-huh. Well, I've been kind of living vicariously, through like a lot of the other hobbyists, because I'm on like so many different hobby Facebook groups and so forth. I've been able to tweak it enough now to where I've pretty much got nothing but hobby stuff coming up in my Facebook feed anymore. So there's very little like, political type stuff or any of that. It's all just basically like who's painting what, who's coming out with the next release, and, this is the next Kickstarter, and, that type of stuff. So I kind of look at everybody else's work as like, oh, look, such and such just painted a thing over here, and somebody's painting this, and somebody went and played, a demo game and blah, blah, blah. So it's like, oh, that would be fun if I ever, got to do something like that. So it's a very remote activity now.
Yeah.
I forget what model I picked up. I was painting one model the other day, and it was one of the first ones that I'm like, I'll really go slow with this, try to get a lot of detail. I got about halfway through, was, done for the evening. The next day I was looking on Facebook and, have a lot of hobby stuff coming through, and then all of a sudden somebody else had the same model. They're like, look at how I painted this, and I painted it in an hour. And I looked at mine, and I was just like, I'm throwing mine in the trash now. Thanks, dick.
Was that you that shot the video of that? Because it was, I can't remember what it was, but I saw like a video clip. And it was like they showed on their computer monitor on the screen. It was I think it was like Ben Comet's work, okay, and he was painting like this. It looked like something from Black Sun Miniatures or something like that. I mean, it was this big barbarian guy, and the camera panned from where they showed his painting on the screen down to like their model that they were holding in their hands, and they just panned over and just dropped it into the trash.
Yes.
And it was like, that made the rounds, and I went like, yeah, I've wanted to do that with some of the stuff I've been working on too. So
I've had that feeling once or a dozen times.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't remember who posted that, but that was pretty funny.
Yeah, I remember hearing stories about it, but I never got a chance to witness it in person.
Yeah.
Which is probably a good thing, because I'd still be laughing about it to this day.
Yeah.
Oh, man. So what else have you been working on besides, obviously, you've got the Babes Kickstarter. That's a big piece of it right now. But do you have any other side projects that you're working on right now for other companies that you want to tell us a little bit about?
Man, yeah, I wish. Here's the thing. I mean, over the past year, I've been so buried under client work, and have been working on not only stuff for Bombshell, but other people's Kickstarters. So because I did stuff for last year, I did stuff for DGS Games and On the Lam Games, and there was just all these different Kickstarter projects that I'd kind of worked through, and I the more that I had done on them, the more I got behind. I was working on a big batch of stuff for MegaCon games. I guess they did the board game Myth, and had done some stuff. So I was sculpting a bunch of their Naga, and they're like these big fish creature things and all this. And they're really cool. The designs on them were great, and I really wanted to work on that. And And so I was kind of working with them, and I wound up having to go back and redo some stuff because they had changed, what they wanted on them. And so it kind of put me behind on, working on that stuff for them. And then the more I worked on some other stuff, I got behind on, doing some other things. And it just continued to snowball to where I got behind her on stuff. And even leading up to, launching Babes 3, it was like I really wanted to launch it with 6 completed sculpts. And that's typically the way that we've done it before. But I'm working on finishing up some stuff for Dark Sword right now. And because I kind of had to split my time between, finishing that project and then, working on this project, I didn't get quite all of the stuff finished before we launched. But I thought, this is kind of a cool opportunity for me to post a lot of work in progress pictures. Because, that way people can kind of follow along and see, the progress of how they're turning out and everything. And that's kind of fun, because you don't get to see that all the time. It's just like, hey, here's a new miniature, and you don't really kind of think about, what went into making it. So, so hopefully, with this project, we'll kind of show a little bit of that, and you'll kind of get to see the progress on it. But, so I'm trying to get caught up right now. We had launched Critterkins, a few months ago, and that was, Vicky's pet project that she wanted to do. And so we've been casting all of that in-house. And typically we don't really want to overlap trying to fulfill one Kickstarter when we've launched another one. And I know that's kind of tanked, a lot of other people that have done stuff like that before. But we looked at it as, it's like, well, this is something that we can manage because I'm done with all of the sculpts on the Critterkins project. I mean, I had sculpted all the ones that we had funded, and those are in production right now. So basically, I'm, still making a few molds on it, and Vicky's doing, the majority of the casting and stuff here because we're doing all of the resin production in-house. So in that regard, we're going along with production just like you would expect. I mean, she's running the mold cycles and doing all that stuff, and I'm really kind of back to sculpting on other things. And it's just punctuated in between by having to make a set of molds here or there whenever she goes on to the next thing. So it's going to be manageable, and we're looking at wrapping up that stuff before ReaperCon, which is going to be towards the end of October. So.
ReaperCon. That's one that eventually I want to get to.
Yeah, it's a nice little show. If you took something like Adepticon and you scaled it down by about 90%, basically, that's what you're going to get out of ReaperCon. There's still gaming events and stuff that go on there, and there the hobby side of it is unmatched. I mean, they've got top-notch people coming in and teaching, all weekend, like sculpting and painting and basing and terrain and just anything that you can think of that you would possibly want to do, with the miniatures or wargaming hobby. They're going to teach a class on it. Aaron Lovejoy, is doing airbrushing, and James Wapple, is doing basing and painting and all kinds of stuff. And so it's a pretty amazing, setup that they've got. And we've had a lot of fun going, in the past. And this is the first time that we're going as exhibitors. So the traffic on it is about, 500 or 600, I guess, that weekend, which is, down quite a bit from like what you would expect, at, an Adepticon type show. But that kind of makes it a little bit more intimate because the way that they set up kind of their hobby area in between classes, you can go and just hang out with like the other hobbyists and get all kinds of tips and tricks and stuff, on painting and all that, or just, catch a pickup game I want to do. So it's a really intimate, type of a setting. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's, I've heard a lot about it. I've seen a lot of pictures, and, for me, I think a lot of it's the spectacle, where you go to Adepticon, a lot of it is going to be, I mean, yes, obviously Crystal Brush is held there, and nobody's like, sneezing at the Crystal Brush Award by any stretch of the imagination. But,
yeah.
But Adepticon for the most part is very much like a gamers convention, where Reaper is kind of the other side. It's not that the gaming doesn't go on, but it is definitely a a painting and sculpting convention first.
Yeah, yeah. And it pretty much came out of that. They used to have 2 shows a year. They would do ReaperCon in the spring, which was kind of right around Adepticon time, and then they would do what they would call an Artist Con, which was mainly, the hobby aspects of it, in the fall. And now they've just kind of pared it down just to the one show, and they're kind of doing all of it, at that one convention, which is kind of cool for me because then I can just go, once and get all the stuff, at the same time. So.
Yeah, and that's not too far from you, is it?
Reaper is about an hour from us, and the hotel that they have the convention at is a little bit closer. So I think it takes about 30 minutes for us to drive from here to the hotel where they have the show. So this is going to be great for us this time because we can just throw the stuff into the Santa Fe and just drive it over there, and then come home, it's in the evening. So I don't have to get a room and deal with, unpacking and, doing all that type of stuff. So it's a much, there's a lot less stress, on us. And I don't have to find a cat sitter. So we can come back and feed the cats. So that's always good.
Yeah, well, that's going to be a handful on that. That's always one of my biggest things is like, especially if Dana and I are leaving, going out of town, it's always like, oh God, now we got to find somebody to watch the animals.
Yes. And that's harder than you would think it would be,
I know. You would think it'd be much easier than it would dealing with kids, but
yeah,
at least with kids, I mean, I guess you get, I don't know, Nick, you have kids. Do you just like leave out some food on the counter and put some newspaper on the floor? What do you do?
Leave a 20 for pizza. They're 4 and 10.
Oh,
they should be fine.
That's just the right age. Hey, man, I was on my own when I was 10. They left me alone, and I didn't burn the house down. So, it just depends on how responsible you are at that age.
Yeah, well, now I'm going to have to Google that. Patrick Keith burning house down.
You will find nothing on that.
Are we sure that didn't happen?
Right. And something here about, strangely, there were reporters that went missing during that time. No.
I'll never tell.
So what else do you got planned for the Kickstarter? I mean, I know you got a lot of stuff going on for different projects. You've only shown the 12,000 stretch goal. You've shown the 16. What else you kind of got planned going down the pipeline?
I mean, we licensed 6 initial designs from Chris in order to kind of launch, to get started, and then I optioned 6 other pieces that we had kind of picked out. So I mean, I've got some art that I'm going to show for stretch goals, and then. I'm working on some other sculpts. Like I've got an orc blacksmith that's going to go along with, I guess, the melee piece that we have. It's just another companion blacksmith kind of thing. But we had done an orc character that was it's kind of a shaman kind of a thing on Babes 2. Really kind of cool to do a conversion of that because I still have the resin dolly, cast. And I thought, well, I'll kit her out, like an orc blacksmith because we had some requests for that. So I'm working on that as like a next stretch goal sculpt, that I'll post. And then I've got kind of a character that's called, I'm calling her Jillian right now. And she's and she kind of started out as Babe Sapien. But I really couldn't call her that, for obvious reasons. But she's kind of an aquatic sort of from a lagoon kind of type of thing. So I'll be showing that, as I'm working on it a little bit later on. But then I've got some other, fantasy and sci-fi pieces that, have potential that if we get to them, stretch goals or whatever, then I'll be putting those out there.
All right, cool. So you definitely got some other stuff in the works.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's still some stuff going on behind the scenes.
Now, the one thing that has been brought up to you in the past is you've done Babes. When are you doing Bros?
That's funny because I've seen that like in a couple of places on some of the hobby groups that I don't want to say troll. I should say lurk. I guess I lurk. I lurk on the hobby groups, and see what everybody else is posting, and then But there was I can't remember which one it was, but there was a couple of topics and stuff out there that they were looking for, bro figures, and we had that discussion, quite a bit. It's like, well, do we want to put out a line of male characters? And it's like, well, everybody else is already doing male characters. I'm already sculpting male characters for other companies and things. It's like, well, what can I really bring to it that would be different, And so I think what I want to do is it would be something that we wouldn't really do like a Kickstarter for, or anything. I mean, it wouldn't be like this huge fanfare kind of thing. I have some characters that I would like to sculpt, some things in mind, sci-fi things and kind of iconic, adventurer type of characters and stuff that you would expect, from like, pulp style movies and that type of stuff. And I think we'll wind up just, doing a set of them and putting them out. And, if I can ever get to the place to where I can, put out regular releases, then it would be something that we would build on, over time, just as, I would be able to, add characters to it. So, and we've done a couple of gender things, reversals. We've got the, I guess it's Blake Russell, that's kind of a Kurt Russell sort of knockoff, and we've got that kind of thing. So, I mean, I may wind up, trying to go and find, some iconic, female characters like the Little Mermaid or something like that and make a male version of it. I mean, I don't know. There's, there's all kinds of different, options out there. So
I know from what I've seen on it, they want, and Shoshi Bauer is a big proponent on it, but you've got to have a nice butt. She's very, very obsessive about a model having a nice butt. And it's it's kind of doing the pinup style of it.
Yeah. And I mean, there are some other companies out there that are doing pinup. I don't really consider our stuff to be really pinup type stuff. I mean, what we were trying to do with the Babes was kind of the opposite of that, where it was like, well, I mean, you've got these kind of objectified pinups and stuff. And so we wanted to make actual, female characters or whatever. So I think it would be really kind of a funny role reversal to do like these really over-the-top, exaggerated, beefcake type, miniatures, just to see if, we could intimidate, the male, hobby community. So I was like, oh my gosh, it's like, well, I don't have pecs or biceps like that. I feel so, inferior, kind of thing. So,
but I think that's the twist that you got to take with it, because everybody's making like your typical like He-Man or action hero looking characters. You need to take it that extra step and either take them like over the top ridiculous, like a Johnny Bravo.
Yeah.
As like Conan the Barbarian. Yeah. Just like do straight up gamers, like your everyday gamer thrown into like a fantasy world. So like, in the case of Nick, he would just be like this dwarf.
A slightly above average height dwarf, thank you.
Bogart the Destroyer.
Very Hobbit-like.
I advocate this. But then you bring the Hobbit in. I do have flat feet, but come on.
But are they hairy? That's the linchpin, right?
Not too hairy, but
Okay.
Because I think that would be the other thing that people would appreciate. So, because again, not talking about objectifying anybody, but like when we see miniatures and like we see it in sci-fi and fantasy and all that for so long, we see like what we consider to be the quote unquote ideals of what we consider men or what we consider women. You know what I mean? I think like going like way over the top cartoon or just like, here's a regular gamer slapped in that role.
Yeah.
Just like for the tongue in cheek of it.
Right. Well, and what's funny about that is that, I see a lot of that stuff online and we really want to, service, a particular demographic of the, the hobby community. And so that was one of the reasons why we started that line to begin with. Right. But I mean, it's not a new thing. It's like, and I see, a lot of discussion and stuff about it and all this. And I mean, if you go back to these classical Greek sculptures, and I'm talking about stuff that's, 2,000 and 3,000 years old, that have survived. Okay, well, these marble carvings that they've done, are really idealized from what, they were probably looking like, at the time. And so, to me, it's like, as an artist, one part of me is, do I want to faithfully recreate this subject? Okay.
Sure.
And then the other part of me is like, do I want to create an idealized view of this subject? And it's like, well, is one more commercial? And, there's just a whole bunch of different aspects to that. But really, it just comes down to an appealing aesthetic. It's like, how do I want to be represented? Like if somebody was going to paint a portrait of me. Okay. Well, it's like, I'd prefer if you could go in and, airbrush some things or, or whatever, right? I mean, why wouldn't anybody want that? And so, it's not to say that it's like, this is how things should be, but maybe it is in kind of a way that it's like, well, this is an idealized version of this or that character or whatever, but it's like, we're talking about heroic characters. It's like, well, these are, out of the ordinary. If you take a character like Indiana Jones, it's like, well, he's got kind of an everyman quality to him, but at the same time, he's still got kind of a heroic quality to him where it's like he can really luck his way out of a bunch of shit that it's like you shouldn't be able to do, So, so I can see both sides of it, and it's a very fine line, to ride on that. And hopefully, we're on, what we're doing with Bombshell is, we're trying to ride, that particular side.
Right. Yeah, because there's one thing that I definitely could say about your miniatures is the fact that, like, yes, they still kind of have that. I don't want to say classic pinup damn girl well doing something. They're not just standing there saying, "Hey, look at my rack."
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean? It's all of them are doing something, and like you look at them and say, "Okay, this is what this character is." It's not just, "Hey, look, it's a chick with a gun." Yeah.
Yeah. And, repose has its place, if you're trying to sell a particular attitude or, whatever, you're trying to say something about a character. But I'm a big Frazetta fan anyway, so I kind of go back to the Frazetta school of like, everything should always be in motion. And
right. Yes.
And one of I can't believe, I can't remember if it was William Stout or one of the other artists that had mentioned this in the Frank Frazetta documentary, Painting with Fire. They were talking about Frazetta and looking at his art. And he said, and this always stuck with me after that, was like, anytime that you look at a Frazetta design, the character always looks like they're in motion. Even if they're just standing there. There's like wind blowing or their cape is whipping around or, they're leaning a certain way, and it just creates a vibrant energy to what you're looking at because the medium that I'm working in is incredibly static. I mean, it's a sculpture. It's not going to move on its own. So I want to be able to try to impart as much life, into the piece as I can get because it's only just going to sit there. And have you look at it. So that's always kind of stuck with me. So that you've picked up on that, that's an important thing to me. I mean, that's one of the things that I kind of focus on whenever I try to approach a sculpt is this going to work, in motion, even if it's just standing or sitting or whatever. And the other thing is, does it work in 3D space? Because, it's a weird thing. And I've mentioned this before, but it's a very strange path where you take, it's a 3D object that you're representing. And then someone has interpreted that into 2D space as a piece of art. And then they send it to you to interpret back into the 3D space again. So you've got all of these filters, that you're working through where it's like, well, you've taken the first artist that's filtered into 2D, and now you've taken the next artist that's filtering it back into a 3D object. And so, you're trying to capture a lot, when you go through that process.
Yeah, because, you're always thinking about looking at it from, like, one aspect. where it's like either like from the face or where he's swinging the axe, but you don't think about the rest of the model.
Yeah, yeah, and there's always going to be that beauty shot, where it's like it's going to be that one angle that's like, well, this is the ideal angle of that particular piece, that you're going to view it from. And so, and that's usually like when I work with clients, they're really like, funneling you into achieving that beauty shot where it's like, this sculpt has to look like this piece of art from this angle. And it's like, well, okay, that's not always going to work, okay, because that artist didn't translate all of those objects in three-dimensional space into 2D correctly, And so there's a lot of artists that you can look at. It's like Wayne Reynolds, for example. I've sculpted a lot of Pathfinder pieces for Reaper, based on Wayne Reynolds' art, okay? And he puts lots and lots of equipment and weapons and all kinds of things and stuff on his characters. And it's like, well, you can stack that stuff up, in a flat plane, one in front of the other on a piece of art very easily. But when you turn that model around and you have to take into account that it's going to go into a mold and come out of a mold and all that sort of thing, there's a roundness, to those figures that a lot of that stuff doesn't take into account. I mean, it looks fantastic, as a piece of art, but it doesn't translate as easily, into a three-dimensional space again. So having to engineer some of that stuff is very tricky, to get it to look right, from all dimensions. Because, if the gamer has it in their army, they're going to be looking at the back of it most of the time as it's charging across the table.
Right. So even from the back, like, it still has to look interesting.
Right. It's still got to have stuff on the back of it, And what's kind of funny is somebody had asked for a turnaround on the Melee sculpt that we have on the Kickstarter project. And so I shot a few pictures, from different angles and from the back. And it's kind of cool because she's wearing shorts, basically, because that's part of the character. But she, her apron that she has on that Chris had designed has, like a leather front, and then down at the bottom there's like a little chainmail kind of poking out, at the bottom of her apron. And so when I turned the figure around on the back with the way that her legs are apart, you can kind of see where that apron would be, between her knees. And so I thought, well, do I want to have the chainmail run all the way up through there, to create interest, for the painter? And no, because I don't want to sculpt all that chainmail. But then it occurred to me that it's like, well, typically when, they would wear chainmail, they would have like a padded, undergarment, that would keep the chainmail off of their skin, and create kind of a buffer. So I put this quilted sort of texture on the backside of, that apron between that and the little chainmail skirt. So that's something that I just came up with on the fly. That's like, well, I think that would be interesting for painters, and it creates texture and stuff on the model that otherwise it wouldn't be there. It would just be this flat,
right,
piece of leather or something like that. So.
Yeah, and it definitely adds a little bit more to it. And it gives it a little bit more realism too.
Yeah, yeah.
But, speaking of chainmail, what you said right there, if anybody out there has ever put on a suit of chainmail, after putting on a suit of chainmail, even at a convention where you're just wearing a T-shirt, walking around in that thing for about a minute and a half, you will certainly take that whole idea of the old classic chainmail D&D bikini and throw it right out the freaking window because It's not happening.
Nope. No. That is a very uncomfortable thing for sure.
Yeah, because I know for a fact that even going back to like historical documents and whatnot, if you wore chainmail, it was padded underneath. Like you wore like a padded armor underneath. Right. Sometimes leather if you really hated yourself.
Yeah.
But you always had something sitting there.
Yeah, and that kept the links from pinching and doing all that type of stuff that a couple of pieces of metal rubbing together would do.
Hell, when I put on a chainmail, like just typical chainmail shirt, and all I had on was just a T-shirt, and I still had like pinch marks all over me, and I wasn't doing anything active. I was just walking around the booth. Yeah, yeah, and it'll get you. So, yeah, it will. Yeah, it will. Now imagine if you were like running around doing stuff and trying to be action man or action woman. Like, no. Oh shit, dude! It's hard enough for me just running around in a T-shirt and shorts.
I mean, it's much less, with like armor or something on.
Well, to each his own. I mean, at the same time, like, when I train for kickboxing mixed martial arts, I'm really not wearing anything more than like a nut cup and a, pair of Speedos. So
yeah,
kind of the opposite aspect of that too. So, it's funny too, because thinking back to that, like going back to our conversation about Frank Frazetta and, even thinking about like kickboxing, mixed martial arts, or any type of combat sports that are out there now. I remember a lot of people were giving Frazetta criticism for basically designing these women that were running around in like basically nothing, and dudes that were running around in basically nothing but a helmet and like a tunic.
Yeah.
And, at the same time, like, I see where people are like, oh, well, that's offensive, and like you're objectifying people. And at the same time, it's like, well, no, because if you really want to be able to move, the easiest way for you to move is to be as naked as possible.
Yeah, and was it the Picts or the Celts later on that kind of learned that, where, I mean, basically they would paint blue woad over themselves and just run out. They'd lime up their hair and fight the Romans and stuff with basically naked. So
right, because I don't know about the other YouTube, but like if I was standing there and I had a bunch of like just blue painted naked dudes running at me, I'd stop and go, hey, hang on, do I really want to be involved in this?
Right. I didn't sign up for this. Yeah.
No comment.
Nick, you don't have anything to add?
Better you get the crazy ones. I don't know, they start naked, painted in blue, but they're riding like standing up on two horses coming right at you. It's like, nope, I'm good.
That one,
right.
Yeah, that one's definitely no. I don't need to be teabaed today.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Because the worst part about that, I'd much rather be stabbed than have like both horses pass me.
Yeah.
Because he got his trophy just in a different way. But anyway.
Oh, that's crazy. Crazy.
He had something else covered in blue woad.
Oh, man.
There's just like a blue stripe like right up your forehead.
How'd that happen? I don't want to talk about it. Well, now we know why William Wallace was pissed.
You're right.
Boy, did this just like go completely off track real fast.
Yep,
I actually had a point to what I was saying, and then we started talking about blue wieners. So, yeah, real mature guys. But anyway, we're rolling up on our hour. I got to get the hell out of here. But, Patrick, take a couple minutes, pour yourself out there. Tell us where we can reach you. Tell us about Babes 3. Tell us how many days are left. Go.
Okay. Well, you can find me and all of my other work, all over the internet pretty much. But the place that you want to start is going to be at bombshellminis.com. And that's kind of our launching point, because we've got links on there to our Facebook page and our Facebook group and our Kickstarter project. So we've got 9 days left to go on the Kickstarter project. It's going to wrap up on, let me look at my calendar here. It's the 30th of September at 8 p.m. Central Time. So if you're going to pledge on it, we, encourage you to jump in before that time. We'll also have, late pledging, available at some point, but, and all the babes will hit retail, but they're not going to be at these fantastic Kickstarter prices. So.
Right. Yeah. Usually they're about, what do they usually run? About $10, $12 a piece?
Yeah. Most of our babes are $9.99, and you can get them on the Kickstarter project for 20% off. So I think they're like $8. And plus, then we've also got combo deals too. Like every day throughout the course of the campaign, I'll be posting a little combo add-on, and it's going to be a collection of babes that are kind of themed together. Like today's that we posted was a Western theme, so it's got our Western characters in it, and you can get that for an even better deal than what we normally sell those for.
Nice. Awesome. Well, yeah, definitely. Anybody who's listening to this, definitely go check out the Kickstarter. Nick, is there anything else you want to say before we get out of here?
I just want to whore us out. Hey, folks. Tim adds all the links and all that at the end. But if you listen to us through iTunes or anywhere else, give us a like, give us a comment, leave us a nice review. Go on Facebook, leave a review. Leave a review wherever you can, because reviews help spread the word.
If you think we suck, tell us that too. It's still a comment.
But make sure to leave 5 stars still.
Professional. Awesome. So, to wrap all this up, Patrick, it was great having you on again, man. We got to do this again in the future.
It sounds great. Well, we're going to do another Counterblast project coming up next year. So awesome. It's going to be all deluxe with a whole bunch of new models and new rules and all kinds of goodies that we're working on right now. So I will keep you posted on that. Thanks. I appreciate you guys inviting me on the show again. It's always a blast talking to you, and I always enjoy, the time that I spend on the podcast.
Awesome. And we definitely appreciate having you come back on. It's always great talking with you. It's always great talking with the guys that are really passionate about what they do. So it definitely makes going through this process a lot easier.
Thanks.
Great.
Thank you.
Well, that will wrap up this episode of Skirmish Supremacy, where, again, we are closing off with Patrick Keith. And remember, folks, it's always okay to fight in the nude. Until next time, see you later. Thanks for listening to another episode of Skirmish Supremacy. To see more of the antics that Nick and I do, you can check us out on Facebook at Skirmish Supremacy. We also have Twitter, which we can be reached at Skirmish Supreme, because apparently Skirmish Supremacy does not fit in Twitter. And if you want to email us directly, you can reach us at tim@skirmishsupremacy.com or nick@skirmishsupremacy.com. Thanks for listening.